وجاءت سيارة فأرسلوا واردهم فأدلى دلوه قال يا بشرى هذا وأسروه بضاعة والله عليم بما يعمل وشروه بثمن بخس دراهم معدودة وكانوا فيه من الساهمين وقال الذي اشتراه من مصر لامرأته أكرمي مثواه عسى معنا أو نتخذه ولدا وكذلك مكنا ليوسف في الأرض ولنعلمه من تأويل الأحاديث والله غالب على أمره ولكن أكثر الناس لا يعلمون ولما بلغ أشده آتيه حكما وعلما
Assalamu alaikum to our community at large. I am Dr. Atika Ibrahim. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I'm going to be joined by two colleagues of mine from our community, and we are going to tonight be talking about mental health during coronavirus, specifically things that we can look for and how we can support ourselves and how we can support our loved ones during this pandemic. So, like I mentioned, I'm Dr. Ibrahim, and I'm going to be joined by Sister Fatima Jaffer, who is a school psychologist, as well as Dr. Afshan Muhammad Ali, who is a licensed clinical psychologist. Anytime during this presentation, if you have any questions, you can go to slido.com on your phone, laptop, and use the event code HEALTH and send us questions. They are going to be anonymous, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. We have a lot to cover tonight, so hopefully we'll answer your questions during the presentation. But if not, we are available. We've put up our email addresses, and we will offer them a little later as well, so that you can always email us with additional questions. So tonight we are going to start with Dr. Muhammad Ali, who's going to be talking about recognizing burnout. And then she's going to go through the signs and symptoms, things that you can look for in yourselves and your children. And then we're going to move on to talking to your children about coronavirus, how we can cope with the uncertainty and how we can help our children cope with and our families cope with the uncertainty. And then we want to give you some resources as well. So, Afshan, I just wanted to loop you in and see if you could help us just understand some of the symptoms that we may be feeling now that we've sort of been cooped up in our houses for the last 8 or 9 weeks. What are some things that we can look out for?
Thanks, Atika. Yeah, we thought we would, by the way, we thought we would use some of the space tonight to introduce some common mental health struggles, especially by naming them. You know, naming our feelings not only helps with giving us the language to describe it, but it also then helps us figure out what kind of help that we need the most. I also want to clarify that it's possible to feel some of the things that we're going to be talking about today without warranting an entire diagnosis. But again, it gives us the language, it gives us a way to describe our experiences, so we can communicate them and we can also understand them ourselves. And if any of these do resonate with you, we do encourage you to reach out for help. You can either contact us and we can find you the right sources of help, but we'll also be giving, as Athika said, some resources at the end. So yeah, we'll start with the first common struggle. First common struggle would be related to feelings of sadness, feeling low. So it's very appropriate, especially at this current time, to feel sadness in response to what's going on. It's when these feelings last for quite some time and maybe affect many areas of your life that we would then call it depression. So depression has a number of symptoms to come along with it. Some things for you to keep an eye on are when the things that you usually like to do are impacted. So for example, if you're somebody who loves cooking, if you're somebody who loves running, and either you find yourself doing that less or you find yourself not interested very much at all, we would be concerned about that. You might notice that your personal relationships are being disrupted. So we might find, especially at a moment like this, we might be just easily overwhelmed by all of the, the interest in having more connection, especially at a time when we're so physically distanced from everybody. We might find that our performance at work is different. So again, we want to keep an eye on the fact that this is Ramadan. So we are going to be, already a little impacted by the fact that we're not eating, we're not drinking. So our performances at work is going to take a toll. But again, this is something to keep an eye out over time, how long this has been going on, how long ago it started. So you might find under more of a clinical depressive presentation, our performance at work, you might be struggling to keep up with tasks, maintain deadlines, staying focused, making a lot of mistakes. Another symptom of depression would be the way you think about yourself. You might be, feeling feelings of low self-esteem, low confidence, feelings of guilt, especially about things that you shouldn't feel guilty about or things that are not necessarily your fault. Other impacts, of course, your physical health. So not so surprising that mental health and physical health go hand in hand. So you might notice that you have an increase or decrease in your weight. You might be eating more, eating less. So your appetite's also going to be affected. You're feeling fatigued, you're lacking energy. So with depression, you can have some of these, what I just kind of described, and it's not exactly depression. But again, it's important to think of keeping an eye on some of these things so you can explain this to somebody if you had to. And I also wanted to just take a second to note that we often think of depression as feeling withdrawn from something, but sometimes it can be very externalizing as well, especially in children. Children are more likely to show their depression by either feeling angry or irritable, acting out, rebelling. So those are just some of those signs that you'd want to keep an eye on.
Afshan, I have a quick question. So this is actually a topic that I find that I'm encountering more frequently with my Muslim friends. And a lot of them feel like this might be because of Ramadan, because they're fasting, that they're feeling more lethargic. How do they tell the difference?
Between what they're going through while fasting versus what?
Related.
Okay, yeah. So what I would do is keep an eye on, or maybe even ask yourself, how long has this been going on? Has this been going on before Ramadan even started? Because that's a pretty good indicator of whether or not this is because of something organically depression related or something that's coming up with Ramadan. Depression also it's a chronic thing. So you might find that after you break your fast, you're actually a bit more focused. So if you notice that shift, then it's less likely to do with depression and more likely to do with fasting. Question. So the next area we of course want to highlight, especially given everything that's going on, is anxiety. So when we talk about clinical anxiety, I'm not talking about the general use of the word, but clinical anxiety is when we're describing our emotional response, but to something very internal. So it's very individual to the person with how and what they find anxious or anxiety provoking. So anxiety is generally a feeling of nervousness, uneasiness, feeling scared or fearful, usually about something in the future. That thing in the future is either something that's not totally based in reality. Once it comes and goes, you still find yourself anxious about it. So the fact that it doesn't exist anymore or never existed doesn't help. So these are some of the symptoms of anxiety. And again, you're going to find that while fasting, we're likely affected in this way. So we notice an impact on executive functioning. So executive functioning is actually it's like all located right at the front of your brain and your frontal lobe. So that executive functioning talks about your memory, your ability to focus, judgment, decision making, even a bit of your personality. So if you notice that you're making a lot of mistakes, not thinking straight, forgetting a lot of things that you typically don't forget, we would, I would ask a lot of my patients, what's your anxiety been like? Of course, anxiety is going to have an impact on our thoughts. So we might have racing thoughts, which then, of course, makes us feel distracted. We have a hard time staying present. We might notice disruptions in work because of feeling distracted, even our work and relationships. So we're either not very present for them, we're not really interested in them. They might even make us more anxious. So then we might even avoid that. So we would avoid the things that make us anxious, even though we probably can't afford to avoid them. And then, of course, physical symptoms. So a lot of the common symptoms for anxiety are headaches, feeling hot, some gastro issues, heart palpitations, shaky voice a little bit. Yeah. So in the next slide, I'm also going to talk about stress, and I want to kind of focus on what the difference is, because I think we often use this interchangeably, but those clinically, like I said, are very different things. So stress is going to look the same. You're going to have a lot of the same symptoms. The key difference is, and this is something I use to diagnose, is are you responding to something that is real or not? Are you responding to something that is outside of you or inside of you? So when it's outside, we're talking about an external stressor, so that once that stressor passes, you're more likely to feel better. So an example, back in the real world, when we have an exam coming up or a job interview, once that exam job interview passes, we feel a lot better. That's when I would classify that as stress. And like I said, I think it's important to really know the difference here so that we know what kind of help you need. Because if you're responding to something that's not necessarily real, or kind of maybe with greater intensity than it would be appropriate, then we know that something greater is going on. Stress is going to lead into burnout as well, which is, our hot topic for today. So burnout, if you guys might actually be aware, is typically a term that was used in the workforce. It was first coined by biopsychologists using trying to understand what happens with extreme stress for their employees. So right now, given everything that's going on, I think the buzzword, especially this week that I'm hearing a lot from my patients, is quarantine fatigue. So I think it's kind of explanatory there, but we're just so tired. We're so tired of managing ourselves, being so aware. So we thought we would present a little bit of information in that area so that you can kind of just start to know what you're going through. Hopefully this will provide some validation, but also some direction as to where to go from here. So the burnout was actually identified, I think, last year in 2019 by the World Health Organization. So they actually finally put words to it. So we have criteria to understand what is part of burnout. So the first would be depleted energy, just feeling exhausted. So no matter how much sleep you're getting, for example, you just don't seem to be getting enough sleep to wake up rested, to get through your day. Mental and emotional distancing, so that this means obviously we're in a physical distance kind of climate right now, but even mentally and emotionally is where you just can't emotionally be present and you don't want to. So I'm sure we can all kind of relate. There are so many invitations for Zoom that are going on right now, FaceTiming. And as much as we're not around people, we're still just too tired to present ourselves for that. Negative thinking, kind of self-explanatory, but it's when we have a hard time thinking positively about the future. So when we're having issues with thinking or finding a time or thinking of a time when this is going to end, maybe even we have a hard time remembering when this wasn't our for now normal, that would be a part of negative thinking. Again, decreased performance. We were seeing that before with anxiety and stress. So with decreased performance, especially at this time, we might be finding ourselves making mistakes over and over. At home, we're probably procrastinating on deadlines, having a hard time keeping up. Might not even be making it out of bed at all to join our work day over Zoom or whatever. And then, of course, our physical symptoms, they look pretty much the same compared to anxiety as I was talking about before. And then I think we're also going to touch on, where does burnout come from? So one slide before. The source, there we go. So sources of burnout. So I thought it would be important to consider where this is coming from in our life. We have many things that have changed very rapidly, and sometimes it's hard to know where all of this stress is coming from, especially if it's coming from more than one place at one time. So think about what's happening right now. We're taking on a lot more responsibilities than we've ever taken on before. For example, we might be used to being a spouse and a mom, but now we are not only spouse and mom, but we are teacher, we are caregivers, we are housekeepers, we are chefs, we are personal shoppers, like all of that. While we might have been used to those roles before, kind of throughout the day or throughout the week, we are now all those roles all the time. So that's going to cause a lot of stress, feeling very much taxed by all of that. Being on all the time. I'm sure we can kind of all relate to this as we're trying to stay positive, either for ourselves, for our kids, for our family members. We are trying to cook a lot, right? We're just home so much, so we need to be feeding ourselves, we need to be feeding our family, so we just end up cooking a lot more. That's a lot. Think about all the dishes that pile up simply because of that. We are also trying to be activity planners. We're trying to fill our times, fill our kids' times with things that are meaningful so that they don't feel how different things are or not feel it as much. Again, like I was saying before, we are joining all these virtual social gatherings, and as amazing as it is to be able to use technology at this time, that's a lot of screen time for us. So not only is that going to have a physical effect on how we're doing and how we're feeling, but we're going to also just be taxed by, again, being so present, being so aware of how we're coming across over the screen. And then, of course, not feeling like there's a good reason not to. Well, what else could you be doing if you can't join a 3 p.m. Saturday phone call, right? Okay, so then our next point, another source of burnout that I would, encourage you to consider is, and this is something I can definitely relate to, is how much more aware we have to be about everything, especially our hygiene and our health practices as they keep changing according to the news and things like that. So the simple act, for example, of going grocery shopping is gone from something rather simple to going extremely prepared, being very aware of what you're touching, where you're touching it, when, and then coming home and disinfecting everything. So that entire process, like I said, went from something that was very simple to something that we're almost paranoid about. And now that is going to take a toll over time if it hasn't already. Another source of stress, which can lead to burnout, is our exposure to the news. It was probably really appropriate in the beginning to sign up for all of these notifications on our phone, make sure we tune into Cuomo right at the 11 o'clock hour. We are getting daily emails, we're getting multiple texts. So that's a lot of information that's coming at us. And at the same time, it's our job to figure out what's real news, what's misinformation. And so that's a lot of work that we're trying to do with not a lot of bandwidth to do that. And then the other one, I'm sure a lot of us can relate to this as well, is pressuring ourselves to make the most of this time. So I find myself, especially at the beginning of quarantine and self-isolation, telling my patients that we didn't ask for this time. We didn't we didn't plan for it, we didn't prepare for it. So then to pressure ourselves to make the most of it, I think is a lot. So even though you might be on social media and you're seeing all of these baking challenges and people who are learning new skills and picking up new languages, I don't think that this is the time where you necessarily have to pressure yourself. It's okay just to kind of get through the day.
Um, I actually have a quick question.
Yeah.
So many of my coworkers have been talking about feeling burned out, and so I work with children. But in addition to that, looking at the social emotional, how social emotionally children are doing, we also look at our coworkers, and they've talked a lot about being burned out. But is there a way for them to tease out, or do you have any suggestions for them to tease out what is really causing them to feel burned out from like the things you mentioned? Is there because everything's happening so much at once for them, that is there a way to figure out which one's kind of on the top tier of really being the trigger for their burnout?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm thinking about when I'm working with patients with general anxiety. Sometimes it's so overwhelming that, like you're saying, it's really hard. It creates this like foggy mind to know exactly what's going on. So I do find it's helpful to take a second, do some breathing, and just kind of sit with yourself. If you're not working with a therapist or a provider, you can take some time to yourself, just kind of like check in how you feel right now. And then I love the idea of scheduling throughout the day, no matter what time, no matter what it is, every day at 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock. Check in with yourself and see how you feel. And if something has gone up, if something has gone down, you can kind of look at how you spent them the last couple of hours to see what might have led to that. The other thing is simply reading some of these things. Sometimes you might feel yourself getting a little bit more agitated, and that's kind of your signal, or that's what it is. That's what it's not. Another way to do it is something very similar to the purpose of elimination diets, so that you kind of take something off your plate, see how you feel. If that didn't really change, take another thing off your plate, especially if you can afford to. So that as you start introducing more responsibilities back in, slowly, gradually, in a titrated way, you're going to start to see what kind of impact that has. And most importantly, and I know we're going to talk about resources later, ask for help. That kind of helps alleviate a lot. And then that's also another way to know what's kind of getting at you. Oh, something so that I'm very excited to talk about is something that I remember learning when I was in school. And so that once I started working with patients, especially a few months ago, I started seeing this trend. So I found that in the first couple of weeks, we were pretty much alarmed, right? So we have this alarm reaction where we're panicked, we're very alert. So this is actually the time when a lot of people go to the grocery stores and buy all the toilet paper and all the canned goods that they can, even though we were told not to, but we're acting from panic, right? And without noticing, our immune system actually lowers. Then I saw us as a whole kind of get used to what was going on. We found ways to make our life meaningful. We found ways to connect. Even things were exciting. They're trending on social media. But so we're doing okay. And then and that was the resistance. And now in exhaustion, this is kind of what I'm seeing in the last few weeks, is we are tired. We are hitting a wall. We don't have the resources anymore. We're just kind of done. And this is exactly where burnout is. So that we don't want to do this anymore. And so then we find our health is actually impaired. And we might be getting sick. We might be sniffling a bit more. We might be more susceptible to getting sick. And that's really scary given the fact that we are in this situation because of a virus. So that means we're even more susceptible to it. The reason I'm bringing this up is one, to show that there is a model here and that there is an understanding and a pattern to what we're all going through, but that this is also the moment to intervene the most so that we can prevent getting sicker, we can prevent feeling more depleted as we move forward. Thank you. And the last thing I wanted to touch on just briefly is, especially something I've noticed, is everyone is having a very different reaction to what's going on. And I call it a polarizing experience because a lot of those reactions are extreme from each other. So that you might find a lot of people are mimicking experiences of grief. So of course we're talking about grief in terms of like loss of life, which is of course very tragic and scary. But there's also grief about you know, what life used to look like, and we don't have that anymore. We miss our old routines. We've had to cancel very important things in our lives too. For example, weddings, graduations, baby showers. These things are kind of getting either postponed or canceled, and that's extremely sad. Um, let's see. So you might also notice, especially some of us who live with other people, whether that's family or we're talking to people over social media or Zoom or FaceTime, changes in sleep or appetite. So you might be sleeping a lot, that your friend might not be sleeping very much. You might notice that you need a lot of space, emotional space, like I was talking about before, versus somebody else needs to be constantly talking to somebody. Some of us might, want to be in touch with the news all day, every day, and some of us just don't want that at all. And like I was saying before, some of us are actually enjoying, this time, and some of us are really having a hard time finding something positive. So I just wanted to put that out there so that we can recognize we're going to have a different reaction, but also recognize when that's happening in somebody else.
Akshan, that was really helpful to learn about some of the symptoms that we may and some of the signs that we want to look out for in ourselves. I think, Fatima, I want to ask you, is there anything that we can look out for in our children? Are there any signs, any symptoms that might be warning signs for us that maybe we're not just the only ones that are dealing with this, but maybe our children might be dealing with some of this anxiety, depression, or burnout as well?
Nice segue there, Athika, because actually that's the next slide. That's what we're going to start talking about. Um, one of the hallmarks of our discussion is going to be how to talk to children about COVID-19. But before we go into that, I just wanted to kind of piggyback off of some of the things that Afshan had highlighted and just briefly talk about some of the warning signs in children that we should keep in mind. So I'm just going to run through this list pretty quickly. If we start to notice excessive crying or irritation in some of our younger children, that's just something to keep an eye out for. Sean also mentioned unhealthy eating and sleeping habits. I think that, it's Ramzan, so we should probably put it into perspective. A lot of us are staying up later in the night and waking up later in the morning. So, that might be, our unhealthy sleeping habits right now might be due to just our, a reaction to Ramzan and not necessarily something from before. If you notice children having difficulty with attention or concentration, if you notice it even in yourself, just being a little distracted and unfocused, that's just something to keep in mind that could be related to a lot of the changes we're going through this pandemic. Avoidance of activities enjoyed in the past. I think we're heading into week 8 of quarantine, and maybe week 1 or 2 we're all excited. I'm gonna read a book. I'm gonna paint. I'm gonna sort of do all these new things. Whereas now we may not feel as enthusiastic about working on those things. So that's another thing to just kind of keep track of, both in ourselves and in our children. Unexplained headaches or body pains that's not related to an actual illness is something to keep an eye out for. Problems falling asleep and staying asleep. We're in a time of uncertainty, and a lot of times our minds are racing and we're thinking about financial difficulties and a whole bunch of things that might be keeping ourselves up at night. And that same thing can happen for children, that there are things keeping them up in the middle of the night, but they may not really understand what's keeping them up. So just, if you find that your children are having a hard time falling asleep, or they're waking up in the middle of the night, that's just something to keep an eye on as well. For our younger children, if they're clinging to their caregivers a little bit more than they used to in the past, that's a big warning sign. It's definitely developmental regression for some of our younger ones. You find that they're constantly just looking around to make sure that you're there, mom and dad are around and in the area. That's something to be concerned about. And repetitive play is one, but another one I want to talk about just a little bit is withdrawal and irritability. We're all combined. I'm sorry. We're all in a tight space right now. We're all in one house. We're all sort of in each other's space, and things that normally would have we would have brushed off, or children would have brushed off. they may be getting to more fights with their siblings and little things that are now setting them off the edge. And it's just important to keep these little pieces in mind, kind of in the back of our head, when we talk to our kids, when we're around our kids, to see if we're noticing some of those changes, because that could, be something that if it's goes for a prolonged amount of time, an extended amount of time, that may lead to some concern. The second, oh,
Fatima, is there any kind of specific body painter that we can look for in children, especially younger children?
so for a lot of, and I think, Sister Sean can also chime in. A lot of pain, in terms of when you're stressed or when you're anxious, kind of comes in your shoulders. You start to feel a little bit tense and in your neck. So that's definitely one of the areas to sort of look at in terms of, you know, uh, stress or anxiety manifesting itself, somatically in body parts. A lot of shoulder and neck is really what the research that I have read shows. Really great question.
For the
So
audience, just in case you have any more questions, just a reminder that you can go to slido.com and put in the event code health.
We have a question, Fatima, if you don't mind.
sure, absolutely.
Might have come in. If my child has some of these symptoms, does that necessarily mean that they have anxiety or depression?
No, not necessarily. These are they're just behavioral signs that us as clinicians have been cautioned to just keep an eye out on. That just to monitor. We're all going through something, so it's some of this is expected to come about. However, if these changes persist for longer extended periods of time, and that there's really no ebb and flow, that it's sort of consistent, you're feeling these feelings consistently, then I would recommend reaching out to your doctor or your child's pediatrician and sharing with him or her what you're feeling, and they can direct you to referrals so that you can gain more information and find the appropriate help to handle that. That's a really great question. Any more questions from the panel yet? Or guess not. Okay. So this brings us to one of the big discussion points that we wanted to speak about, and that's how to talk to your children about COVID-19. So start off by asking your children what they know. Many parents, they're surprised when they start talking to their children that either A, they really don't know what's going on, or B, that the information they do know is somewhat distorted. So if you look on the slide, a couple of questions there, and they're mostly why and how questions. And so you'll notice that they're very open-ended questions. And that's on purpose because that allows us to foster a supportive environment for our children where they feel comfortable asking questions, but more importantly, they feel comfortable coming back to ask questions. And that's really important because you want to be able to give them, concrete information, which we'll look at in a little bit. So how do you start that conversation with your children? This is a chart, an approach that many educators use, mostly on the elementary level, for writing tasks, just regular writing tasks in the classroom. But looking at it, I felt it was something that could really apply here. And it's a simple, self-explanatory KWL chart. So it starts with what I know. So that's really where you would start your conversation with your child or your teenager is, what do you know? What do you know about COVID-19? What do you know about social distancing? Why do you think schools are closed? Those are the type of questions you would want to ask them. Again, open-ended questions. And then as you move on to the second column where it's what I want to learn, that's when you go into what questions do you have? What do you not know about this that you want to know about this? And then transitioning to the last slide, the what have I learned slide, the opportunity really lies right there in between those two columns, because that's where parents and children, caregivers and children can come together and, do some research together. Let's answer these questions that you have. Let's come together and look and online, not just online, let's watch some of the news together, of course, in increments, not too much. And let's figure out how to be able to answer these questions in a way that can ease your anxiety, that can ease your stress, and give you the information that you're looking for. For some of our older kids, you can even direct them to some places like CDC and World Health Organization, and I'll get to that on the next slide. I'm going to go just a little bit quickly just because I'm looking at the time. So when talking to our children and our teenagers, most importantly, be honest, be concrete. If you don't know something, that's okay. It's very important to keep what you're saying to them simple, and to be honest about it, but most importantly, to be calm. Children are very perceptive. They can tell when, we're uneasy when we're talking to them. They can tell where we're unsure. So try to be as calm as you can when you start this conversation with your children. And the honest part really comes from kids have access to all this information on their fingertips, right? They have Google, they have Facebook, they have Instagram. It's right all there. So they know some of this information. And so you want to make sure that you're being honest with them when you talk to them. Again, allow them to ask questions, foster that environment. If you don't know the answer to something, that's okay. Just be honest. I don't know the answer to everything. I'll probably defer to Atika or Afshan on some of these questions, and that's all right because that's how we learn. For more older kids. Oh, yes.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Given exactly what you just said, I thought it might be a good place to ask this question we just got. How should we tell my child who's 9 years old about the deaths that are occurring? I read so many death announcements and it affects me, but should I tell her?
So given that she's 9, I'm assuming it's a female, but he or she is 9 years old. When you talk to them about grief and when you talk to them about all of these, unfortunately what we're going through right now, it's very important in those conversations to be as developmentally appropriate as you can. And I know Atika will be talking about this in a future slide of how to deal with grief. It's very important to not talk about it as though these people who have passed on have gone to a better place. For some of our children, home is supposed to be that safe place. It's supposed to be where they feel comfortable and they feel safe. And so sometimes, even though the intention is there with those words, we want to be able to just be mindful of how we phrase those things. And I find that for children, when working with children who are going through grief, engaging them in tactile activities to be able to, write a letter to the person who has passed on if they've known them, or doing something, for volunteering, or doing something to remember the person who has passed on, is very helpful in going through grief at a younger age, because often it's very hard to understand a concept like that at a younger age. And I'll leave, Atika is going to really talk a lot about this towards the end, so I'm going to kind of leave it to her so it'll come up, but that's just my suggestion in how to, really talk to a child about grief. I'm just going to run to the next slide. All right, so for our younger children, we get a little nervous, a little tongue-tied when trying to talk to our younger children. We try to tiptoe, making sure we use appropriate words. So these are just some phrases that we can use. A virus is a type of germ. The word virus has been thrown around a lot now, so a lot of children know what it is, but for those who don't, that's one way to be able to describe it. But the biggest thing I want to really talk about in this slide is the for now normal. We often watch a lot of the news right now, and they're talking about the new normal, and they're talking about like this is going to be what we're going to be expecting to see for an extended period of time. But I think it's really important for our younger children to really focus on that this is the for now normal, and that when we're going to get to, there's a lot, emphasize that there's a lot of people out there who are doctors, nurses, researchers, and they're working to find a vaccine. And that, yes, it may take time, but, once we get there, we'll be able to return to some sense of normalcy. There's a lot of conversation about how schools are going to look like when they return, and that can cause a lot of anxiety. So it's really important to talk about how this is still very temporary, that we can return to some sense of normalcy, and that it'll take time, but we will get there. But I think it's also very important to emphasize that some things will stay the same, no matter how simple it is. It could be just we're having iftar at the same time, or every night I'm going to read that book to you. Those are still things that are happening for children that are the same, since so much has changed for them, and that really gives them a sense of grounding, a sense of calmness, a sense of control over what's over their life right now, where a lot of things are out of control. And to kind of speak more to that, I'm actually going to pass it over to Atika, and she's going to talk about what stays the same and how we can provide that grounding for our children.
Thank you, Fatima. So some of the things that we want to work out with our children is creating a sample schedule or chart. And I know there are tons of schedules and charts all over Instagram and Facebook and all these mommy groups and daddy groups. But I think there's some key things that we need to make sure that our children know and we know about these schedules that we want to create. Some of the things are going to stay the same. We want to make sure that every day we're waking up and eating breakfast, maybe not now in Ramadan, but brushing our teeth, getting dressed, doing our schoolwork, playing, eating, moving our bodies indoors, having some quiet time, having prayer time. These things are going to stay the same. These were things that we were doing before, and we're going to continue doing them. At the same time, we want to give our kids a sense of control. While we're going to have some things that are going to stay the same, and we want to keep up with those things, we also want to give them some choice in activity. So you want to ask your children about activities that he or she may be interested in, and that you as parents can do easily with them. So they could be cooking or baking, some sing-alongs, reading, screen time, such as watching family movies together, puzzles. And I know a big thing these days is making videos for YouTube or TikTok. So, if these are some things that you could do easily with them, then you can incorporate that into their schedule, get their input into it so they feel like they are also in control of the situation that no one feels like they're in control of. One of the other things that we want to emphasize, just as a family and for kids in general, is how do we stay healthy. So one of the biggest things that we've been hearing lots about is scrubbing and washing our hands for 20 seconds. I just want to emphasize that we're scrubbing with soap for 20 seconds on our wet hands and then rinsing off. So it's a little more than 20 seconds, but we want to make sure we're scrubbing with soap for 20 seconds. We're going to be staying indoors. That's how we're going to keep ourselves and other people healthy, except for walks, playing in the yard with people who live in our house, of course. Unfortunately, there will be no play dates. Coughing into our elbows or tissues, keeping healthy diets and good sleep habits, saying hello from afar, which is at least 6 feet right now, with drive-by meet, Zoom, or Google Hangouts. And then, of course, wearing masks when going to the grocery store or other essential places that we need to know. And just to keep in mind that children 2 years and younger should not be having any mouth coverings. So while we're doing all this, we always want to leave some room for questions for the children. It's normal for children and adults, both mommies and daddies, everyone, to be frightened or worried about this virus. We don't know who's going to be affected by the virus. We don't know who's going to get sicker than the other person from the virus, and we don't know who is eventually going to maybe, succumb to the virus, unfortunately. So we want to reassure them that there are adults that are working hard to help fight the spread of this virus, and they're helping those who are sick in the hospitals. Highlight the things that they can control so that they're not so focused on things that they can't control. So highlight things like their schedule because they can control some of those aspects. Also that they have the ability to FaceTime their friends. They have the ability to, play video games. Those are stuff that they can control. Also reassure them that it's okay to ask questions. And if they don't have questions during this talk that you're having with them, reassure them that it's always okay to come back to you with questions or any other concerns. That'll give them a feeling of safety, at least in the house with their parents, especially in this unsure time that we're all in right now. And then on top of all that, just to kind of take away some of the focus from some of the negative things like the virus, look for some positive, uplifting stories that you can share with your family and with your children. And another thing that you could do is find out what your family focus might be. So some people have started giving to charity. Some are reaching out to elderly or sick ones who might be living alone, like writing letters or FaceTiming elderly people who live alone, and also praying together, especially during this month of Ramadan. This is an excellent time for us to all pray together, fast together, read du'as and amals together. This is really touching. One mom said that her family is actually all praying together, doing namaz all together, and each of her three kids take turns saying the azan before each namaz, which is I thought was a very sweet way to be together and emphasize the positive. So this is something that I'm going to quickly touch on because with all this togetherness that we have, there are going to be times of conflict as well. So even siblings who are the best of friends can get on each other's nerves. So some of the things us as parents can do is look for patterns when the kids are fighting. Do they always argue when you're on a Zoom conference call? Do they take each other's toys when you're always about to start cooking dinner? Are they looking for your attention because, while is that the reason why they're doing this? Is because they're looking for your attention. So try to shift the attention away from this. Praise them when they do actually get along. Tell them you're doing a great job sharing. I love how you guys are playing together, and encourage more sharing and respect for each other's properties. Encourage one person, if one person has taken another child's toy, then you can, encourage them to return the toy. That's the reason why I moved so far away from my siblings, because they keep stealing my toys.
I was gonna share. I stay with my sister and I love her to pieces, but sometimes it's just not good.
Yeah,
And she's watching
absolutely.
right now, so
And this is a very
hot.
broad topic. I just wanted to bring it up very quickly because I know a lot of parents are dealing with this with their children, but this can honestly be a whole nother 2-hour talk about kids getting along. Okay. Again, just another reminder, if you have questions, um, go to slido.com and use the event code health. So now we're going to touch on, since we have a little bit of time left, touch on how we're going to cope with some of this uncertainty. So what are some of the strategies that we can use in this situation? I'm going to actually pass it back off to Fatima. I think as a school psychologist, this piece is really important for her to talk about with us. She's going to be, discussing how we can help our special population children cope with some of the uncertainty. So I'm talking about kids who might have been diagnosed with autism or any kind of developmental disabilities, or any kind of behavioral problems.
Okay, thank you so much. Just two things very quickly. Earlier on, Athika, you'd asked me a question about, how what's the most common physical complaint for children who are anxious or worried or having some of those warning signs. And I did mention neck and shoulder, but in reality, it's actually just stomach aches. So Athika, thank you for pointing that out for me. And just another quick thing, I do love my sister because she did message me. Special populations. So as a school psychologist, I tend to work with students with developmental disabilities and autism, as Athika had mentioned. And even though the next couple of slides are going to talk particularly about how to handle and how to work with these children at home right now, this could really be applied to all of our children. So one of the things is when you're talking about explaining the now normal, whereas often we can just engage in a conversation with some of our children, it's also important to realize that for some of our population that have developmental disabilities such as Down syndrome, autism, learning disabilities, language-based deficits, they need a little bit more help in being able to understand really what's going on right now. So social stories is a strategy and a tool that a lot of special education teachers and a lot of special education providers just in general and people who work with these children in schools use to help explain certain situations, problems, and how people deal with them. It really basically takes things that come naturally to us and breaks it down so that where these children have a hard time where it comes naturally to them. It was primarily developed for children with autism to understand social norms. So the top left, which is the COVID-19 story, actually came from the UNC Frank Porter Graham Child Development Institute, and it's a social story describing COVID-19. And social stories often use simple language, and they include pictures to assist with that comprehension piece. Since a lot of these children have language-based deficits, and it goes beyond just about COVID. It talks about how to have a conversation, how to act in a grocery store, and that's especially important now. Now the increased precautions that we take going into a grocery store. So the two of there are just examples that that we use to be able to explain COVID-19, and on the right side, why schools are closed. Because I think that's a big question that a lot of children have had, because we're closed until the end of the school year. That's about 3 months kids aren't in school, and so that helps describe where we are and why we are in this situation. There are, just to preface that, there's no need to be able to like make up your own social stories. We're very fortunate. A lot of service providers, a lot of people in the school districts have come up with these, and they're available on the internet. And I do know that myself, Atika, and Afshan have compiled a list of helpful resources that we'll be putting in a PDF document that we will be sharing with the community. And there's a number of social stories on there that will be useful to parents who in our communities that have children with some of these developmental disabilities. Okay, there we go. Visual schedules. This is going to just go off. I'm going to go through this briefly because, Atika did mention it earlier. The benefit of schedule here is twofold. First, it structures your children's day, which provides them with a routine that they're used to within school. Most importantly, this provides sanity for the adults in the household, because trying to manage work, school, being a chef, kitchen's always open, all of that just becomes very, very overwhelming. So creating a schedule just provides a sense of calm and routine for both parents and children. For children with significant developmental disabilities, this is really necessary because a lot of these children go to school over the summer. So this time at home is very different for them. They're not used to it. And so this just kind of mimics their school day, and it helps them with that. It also helps them foster independence. If you look at that schedule on the bottom, it's very explicit. It talks about, getting dressed, brushing my teeth, brushing my hair, very specific things that, again, come naturally to us, but not necessarily to children with developmental disabilities. Schedules like this also break down tasks. If you look at the visual on the top right, it's a task of how to wash hands, making sure you scrub for 20 seconds. We've all been, all of our children have been told, sing the happy birthday song while washing hands. Personally, I recite Dua Faraj. We can always do that. That's also a good option for us, when washing our hands. It takes the same amount of time. The last picture is actually just a picture, but it comes from a social story about social distancing. And I really want to focus on that because it's really important. Just working in a school right now, there are conversations about reopening plans and what schools are going to look like in September. There's a lot of, anxiety in terms of what that's going to look like. And we're having that conversation now. And we're looking at trying to figure out how we're going to social distance within a school. The concept of children probably having to wear masks when they go back. All of these things are being thrown around as possible, not necessarily solutions, but things that we would have to do going back. So for our, really vulnerable population, our developmental disability population, having the social distance story now as a proactive measure is really good, because that's something that they're may have to deal with come September, October, November. Right. Next slide. Okay, this is probably the big piece, behavior management. Again, not just for our special population, also for, our general education students. Kids are at home. It's, they're supposed to mimic a school day, but if they're sleeping late and if they're staying up late and sleeping late, they're not really mimicking that school day. A schedule of reinforcement is something that is often used as part of behavior plans that are created for children in the school setting. A lot of this feels very natural, very self-explanatory, and honestly, most of us do this already, but for our developmental disability population, for our children who have autism, the visuals are very helpful, because they are, a lot of these developmental disabilities and autism are language-based deficits. So the visuals provide a better understanding of what they need to be able to do and accomplish. Excuse me. So just a quick run, you can use timers. Timers are great. I expect you to finish this math worksheet in 10 minutes. And if you finish that math worksheet, then you can get what you want. So, or the reward that you're working towards. So for example, first then chart on the top right. First, you finish writing those 2 paragraphs, then you get to play Minecraft. Whatever that reinforcer is, it has to be very strong and has to be very potent, because they have to want to work for it. So for some of our children, it's games. For some of it's playing on YouTube. For others, it's a specific candy they might like. I work mostly with boys, so I don't know what games girls might like, but I'm sure there's something out there. Um, for the to-do/done chart, that's really for some of the older children who can self-monitor. And it actually allows parents to kind of let their children sort of go off and say, okay, I want you to do your math, and then I want you to do your reading. Make sure you get your namaz in. Make sure you recite your Quran. And what they'll do is as soon as they're done, they kind of place it over to the done side. And then they can come to you and say, okay, I've done X, Y, and Z. Can I now, go watch something on Netflix, whatever, they're working towards. And the other one on the bottom right is just another chart to use. Most importantly, be consistent. When you're providing this, if you're going to say you're going to give a reward in 10 minutes, give the reward in 10 minutes, because it's really based on making sure that they are expecting that to happen at the end. With anything, you want buy-in. Provide choices for them. Create this plan with them. Because you're selling them something. You're telling them that this is what we're going to do. And so you need them to buy into it. So when you give them the choices, then they're more invested in the plan. Last but not least, very, very quickly, another part of behavior management, and this is really for our nonverbal autistic population and children who have not developed language yet, and it's called a PEC system. It's called a Picture Exchange Communication System. My members in the community that work in schools that work with developmental disability and autistic students are aware of what this looks like. And basically, it's a system where children can express their wants and their needs. They can also express their feelings. But there is a program which allows us to develop this for children, and it actually is connected to school districts. So school districts purchase this program to help them, and there's a licensure. They're licensed to be able to use it. So while I am unable to provide that for you, I know that school districts. I really encourage you to speak to your children's service providers, occupational therapists, physical therapists, speech and language pathologists. They will be able to provide this for you because they're already providing it for your children within the school. Should your child not have someone to go to, they don't have a service provider, when we go back and give our email addresses, please reach out to me. I will definitely be glad to help you create it with the best, the resources that I have. And we'll take it from there.
Thank you, Fatima. I'm going to go back and talk about helping children say goodbye from afar. And this is something that Fatima touched on because we already had a question about this. So like she mentioned, we're in a very unknown time. Like I mentioned before, we may have a family member or a close friend who may have passed away from coronavirus. We want to be honest with with our children about this. So use the words dying or dead with them. Avoid using words like in a better place or went away, because that implies to a young child that, the person has left them and gone to someplace that's better than where the child is right now, which Fatima had mentioned before, like in their own house should be their safest and best place. So this is not an exhaustive list. There's so many things that you can do for the person. Recite Yasin every Thursday night could be a tradition that you could start for them. Drawing pictures of your loved ones to hang around the house. Keeping a special item that belonged to them, maybe a special hairbrush that was maybe their grandmother's, or a picture that they had of the entire family, keeping that in the child's room so that they can remember the person. Again, not an exhaustive list, and let the child come up with what they want to do to memorialize their loved one who they lost. So I'm going to switch gears actually in the few minutes that we have left, and actually talk about how us as adults can take care of ourselves, because just like they mentioned in the airplanes, if there is a loss in cabin pressure, you put your mask on first, and then you help the little child who's next to you. And so that's what we want to do. If us ourselves are not healthy and not able to cope with this, we're not going to be able to help our children cope with this. So what are some strategies you can help yourself overcome during this overcome burnout during this pandemic? So something that I quickly want to mention, it's just a term that we use to call self-compassion. It's just being kind to yourself. You know, you're doing a great job. You're in the situation that you didn't ask to be in. We're all in this situation together. But you know, being kind to yourself and giving yourself some leeway if you can't get everything done that day, or you can't get to every single Zoom call, or you can't get to every activity, virtual activity that every other mom or dad can get to. Being mindful of our feelings, not suppressing them, and identifying our feelings, that, you know, identifying the feelings that we're feeling, because if we can identify our feelings, we can help our children identify their feelings in this situation. The other thing I wanted to mention is that while the news and the media is using the word socially distance, I prefer to use the word physically distance, because while we are 6 feet away from each other, we are still very much in contact, and probably even more so in contact. I know I have talked to friends that I hadn't talked to in years or months at least, relatives and other family members who I haven't talked to in a very long time, because there's really not much else to do except keep in touch with other people, on top of our schoolwork, of course, and regular work. But in our free time, there are no birthday parties to go to on the weekends or Friday night dinners or Sunday brunches. So we have a lot more time to keep in touch with people. So we're physically distanced, not socially distanced. A couple of ways to reduce our burnout: try to focus on one or two things. Set a realistic goal for yourself. You're not going to be able to attend every bake off, like we mentioned. You're not going to be able to do the whipped coffee plus the banana bread plus the all the cookies that everyone's making. Set yourself a more realistic goal. Try to monitor what you're doing and monitor your behaviors, so you can reflect on your progress and see how you're doing in that goal. And if you do develop a goal for yourself, it's okay to not complete it. You're doing great. It's okay to be derailed from it. It just gives you another chance to try that over again. So, some other ways that we can reduce our burnout: every morning when we get up, think of something that you are grateful for. Just try to structure your day just like we're structuring our children's day. Try to structure your day as well. Write a list of tasks that you might have, and check them off as you go. And you don't have to complete every single task in one day. You can also, you know, move the list. You can make it a weekly list and complete those things within a week. Again, as Fatima mentioned, we're in week 8 or week 9 of this. So, you know, if we could do weekly tasks, lists of tasks rather than daily lists of tasks, we'll maybe get a lot more done, because we don't know where the end point of the situation really is. When can you expect, think about what you can expect of yourself that day. If you know you have 3 hours of Zoom conference calls, plus you have to help homeschool your children, you're not going to be able to also cook a 4-course dinner. What can you expect of yourself for the weekend? Don't overdo it, because you don't want to burn yourself out. And what can you expect of others? If your 10-year-old has never vacuumed before, you're not going to expect him to vacuum an entire house in one day. You want to help him with that, and then be able to teach him so that you can later on expect it. We won't be able to expect it right off the bat. Some things that we like to use for stress management in these situations are breathing exercises. So some people, kids may be calling it belly breathing, where you feel your deep breathing. So you would breathe in very deeply, hold your breath, and then breathe out very deeply as well. Some of these things are going to be on the resources that we provide for you in email. Progressive muscle relaxation is another one that we can provide for you as well. And there's emotional care. How are we going to manage our anxiety? We want to identify the fear that we have. Is our fear getting sick? Is our fear getting someone else sick? Do we have a financial concern? A lot of people, unfortunately, have lost their jobs or been furloughed. How are we going to tackle this fear that we have? For kids, what we do is tell them to write down their fears, rip it up, and throw it out. And that's one way that they get rid of their fear. Also, we can tell them to use the breathing in good and bad colors, breathing in good colors and breathing out bad colors. So a lot of kids pick their favorite color, like blue or green, as their good color. And a lot of them pick their bad color to be black. So what we tell them is, think of all the good things that you want to think about, and breathe those in as your favorite color. For instance, blue. So breathe in blue and breathe out all your anxieties that bad color. So you pretend you're breathing out black. That's an exercise that you can do for yourself and for your kids. Also, I recommend to adults and kids scheduling 10 minutes a day or 15 minutes a day each day to worry. A lot of times these worries pop up when we're praying, especially. I know they do for me. But tell yourself when these worries pop up that, hey, I'm not going to worry about this now. I'm going to worry about this during my 10 minutes that I have scheduled at the end of the day. Journaling is great, physical exercise we've mentioned before, and then also focusing on problem solving. We can't change the situation we're in. Unfortunately, we're all in the same exact situation, but we can change how we react to the situation. Okay. Spiritual care, I think, is really important. Some people have traditions that help them relieve anxiety or depression. Um, some people use religion, like praying, doing dua, amals, fasting. Of course, we've been told that sleeping while fasting, once we've completed our work, is also ibadat. So if you feel like you need to sleep, then go ahead and sleep once you've completed your work. Meditation is important as well. So apps like Calm and Headspace. I know Headspace right now is free for educators and healthcare providers. I think as long as you have an NPI number. YouTube has a lot of great free resources. We have people in our community, such as Asia, who does weekly meditation exercises that we can follow along with. Mindfulness, being grateful for the things that we do have. Some of us still do have our jobs, and we have families that we're surrounded by. We're not alone. And having forgiveness for things that we can't control, and going outside and experiencing nature, going on those walks with our family members. So one of the last few topics that I want to touch on is something called resilience. Resilience is not something that everyone has within themselves. It's something that you can cultivate or nurture. And the way to build resilience is to answer some of these questions. These aren't all the questions that you need to answer, but these are some of them that you can think about to help yourself build resilience. So think about some of your own personal strengths. What are some of your really great coping skills that have gotten you through some adversity or trauma? Um, Write those down, journal them. Think about your community as well. What relationships do you have with other people? What relationships does your community have with other people? And how does the community get through tough times? And how can you use your community to get through your tough times? And also think about what all this really means to us. What does this pandemic, what has it done to our families? What has it done to our lives? Are there any positive things that can come out of this situation? For some people, it's more family time. For some people, it has been more being in nature more, or being able to be more mindful of how they feel. So think about some of the positive things, and this is how you can start building resilience. Just quickly to end, I do want to remind anyone who is under the care of a psychiatrist or a therapist or any other service provider that if you do have appointments, make sure you're following up with your appointments. Make sure you are keeping them. A lot of providers are going to telemedicine, so Zoom, FaceTime, and phone calls. Continue taking your medications as they've been prescribed. Try not to drop off of your medication plan. Be sure to get your refills. A lot of pharmacies are doing no contact deliveries of your prescription, so you can get them without any hassle. In case of emergency, if you're at the point where your anxiety is so deep, your depression has gotten pretty bad, or you're feeling extremely burnt out, and if you feel like you're going to hurt yourself, if you know someone in that situation who thinks they're going to hurt themselves, or you're just feeling extremely overwhelmed, please reach out to any of these phone numbers. Obviously, 911 is the easiest to remember. Also, 1-800-273-TALK, which is the National Suicide Hotline. And Nassau and all counties really in our area, but these are the numbers for Nassau and Suffolk County specifically. They have mobile crisis. So if you feel like you're hurting yourself, or you're going to hurt yourself, or you are hurting yourself, call these numbers and someone will come to your house to evaluate you and determine whether you do need to go to the hospital or not. So I think we're really at the end of this. And if anyone has any more questions, Afshan, did any other questions come through that maybe we want to answer in the last couple minutes that we have?
Yeah, for sure. We have a bunch. So I'll just kind of go down them, see what we can get to.
Okay.
How do we make sure the mental health impact we feel from the current situation doesn't translate into a more permanent impact for us and our children? I can start with the adults in terms of like what to do so that what we're going through right now doesn't kind of translate, or we can ease that a little bit. So that I think a lot of our interventions that Afika and Fatma were touching on towards the end are going to be very helpful to mitigate what we're already feeling, so that when things do kind of evolve and things kind of calm down around us, even our going into that, it's not such a shock. Just like starting in this new or the for now normal was a shock. I'll be honest, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to adjust to then the next normal. I think that in the ways that we take care of ourselves now, the way we've been taking care of ourselves, and then the way we take care of ourselves in the future, including our kids, is going to probably make that transition a lot easier. And I'm a huge fan of this. I would encourage many people to find help maybe now, so that as they're kind of adjusting to that in the future, they have the support system that they need.
One of the other things I want to add is, we keep saying that this is the for now normal and not the new normal. So know that there is an end point to this. We don't know when it is, but there is an end point, and maybe looking forward to things that you're going to do once this is over, either vacations or seeing family members, cousins, friends that you may not have seen recently. Any others?
Yeah, another question. I love this question. Our children are spending more time with us. When restrictions are eased, how can we get them acclimated to spending less time with us, especially the younger ones?
I mean, I can take that. I think we're all looking at each other, seeing who's gonna speak first. But it's I think echoing what Afshan was saying is that coming into quarantine was a big transition. Coming out of quarantine is going to be a big transition, and one of the things that we're gonna notice and see is particularly, I believe, as hopefully, fingers crossed, we get back into schools, into the school buildings in September. Maybe a little bit of school refusal, kids, having a harder time wanting to leave, their family members, their moms and their dads, because they become so accustomed to being around them. And I think a lot of what we can do now that we're very aware of all of these things that might be causing us stress, causing us burnout, a lot of things that we're aware of that might, as warning signs for both ourselves and our children, is to be proactive. And so I would start with maybe sending them to stay with, once, restrictions are lifted and, we're not all stuck in our house, maybe sending them over for a play date with another family member, trying to ease their way in. One of the things, we often do when is gradual exposure to things that we're afraid of, gradual exposure to things that we are fearful of. And so, even just having them stay in a different room from you for just a little bit of time, and just coming back and saying, see, look, you were gone for 10 minutes and I'm still here and you're still here and everyone's safe and it's okay. And then gradually increasing that increment from 10 minutes to a half an hour, to maybe saying, what, I'm going to drop you off at like Nani's house and you're going to spend time there. And, it's understand that you're going to hear the crying, you're going to hear the refusal, and it's going to increase a little bit, and that's just part of what we expect to see in that. In terms of behavioral psychology, it's called an extinction burst, and it goes all the way up. And then once they realize that, once you kind of go to that extreme, and then they see like, okay, I'm okay, you're still here, then that can help, kind of reshape behavior. But as a school psychologist, we are expecting to see that coming into schools in September. And a lot of schools are really going to front load a lot of mental health support. And you're going to see a lot more kids, probably attending like, social skills groups and self-esteem groups and all of those groups when they come back into the building, whether or not they're a special ed student or a general ed student, because we're going to really need to front load and help them with that. But I would be proactive about it now and trying to do that gradual exposure.
We probably have time for one more question. Make it a good one.
No pressure. Let's see. I also don't want to be biased. We have a question about therapy here. But maybe I'll answer.
Be biased.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I'll be biased. Okay. How do you get rid of the stigma of going to therapy? If I want to ask for help, I don't want to be embarrassed or my family.
Good question.
Yeah, I think we could probably all answer this one. I can definitely start. I work with actually a lot of Muslim patients. So I do find that this is happening a lot, and there's a lot of conflict, I think, in seeking help and being open about it. So a lot of secrecy around being in therapy, and that's also very difficult to hold. I would, I mean, I'm always a fan of communication. I think that there's always a way to communicate something. And I think in the beginning, it's probably going to be really hard to do that. But I think if you're coming from an honest place, as honest as possible, as close to your feelings as possible, in a way that doesn't raise defenses, in a way that doesn't point fingers or blame, it's a lot easier to be heard. Um, that being said, again, I'll be honest here too, that is not the it's not always going to turn out well. I've also heard those stories too. I have faith in our community though. And I do think that just having this presentation, for example, is a huge move for us. And so I do think that we're moving in a direction of, making therapy something that's actually not so bad. An hour to talk about yourself is a great thing, right? So,
I also always tell patients that it's just like you would go to the doctor to take care of your diabetes or your high blood pressure. You want to go to the doctor to take care of your feelings as well. You're not gonna feel better physically if emotionally you're not doing well.
And to kind of add on to that, Atika, we often talk about how I think one of the things that we often hear is when you're not feeling well is recite du'as, go for ziyarat and do all those things, and that's going to feed your spiritual soul. It's going to feed your faith. So if you're doing that to feed your faith, you're going to the doctor to see your physical symptoms, and so why not go to a doctor to help you mentally or to help you socially and emotionally? And that's I've come across countless of parents, and this necessarily isn't for going to therapy, but parents who have to come in and have to it's hard accepting when your child has a developmental disability or when your child has autism, and how do you bring them to the table to say your child struggles with something, because you want to see the whole child. And the analogy I always use is exactly what you used, Athika. I said, if your child needed insulin right now, would you deny them that insulin? Your child needed an asthma pump, would you deny them that? Your child needs this. Everyone needs something individually, and if your child needs that, you have to be able to find it within yourself to give it to them and understand that that's just a small part of who you are. It doesn't describe all of you, but it's a small part of who you are. And I think all of us, including the three of us on this panel, need help sometimes. We talk to each other. Often therapists have therapists because they need to sort of get it out. And who doesn't want to, talk to a complete stranger about themselves for an hour, because no one's going to judge you. It's not someone you know. So that's always a benefit too.
Something I find myself saying is, mental health is just as important, if not more, than dental health. If we're going to the dentist at least twice a year, I think it's okay if we.
Well said.
That's really great. So this concludes our talk for tonight. We hope you found this really helpful. This is, again, just the starting point. There's so much more that we could be talking about there, and we are very open to talking about a lot more other things. So if you feel like you have a topic that you want to discuss, or if you just have questions for us, please feel free to email any of us. Anything you email will, again, stay confidential. We won't, and anonymous if we need to ask anyone for additional resources for you. Like Fatima mentioned, we do have some resources that we want to provide for you if you want, either over the Sydney mailing list if you're already on that. And if you're not, you can just email one of us and we can forward those resources to you. We hope that you've gained something out of this talk. We really enjoyed, talking with the community at large and outside of our community as well. I know other people are tuning in. So want to wish you well and hope you have a really great rest of your Ramzan.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Yes.
Lapis.